Charter Act of 1793. The features of this act were as follows. It extended the overriding power given to Lord Cornwallis over his council to all future Governor Generals and Governors of the Presidencies. It gave the Governor General more powers and control over the governments of the subordinate presidencies of Bombay and Madras. It extended the trade monopoly of the company in India for another period of 20 years. It provided that the Commander in Chief was not to be a member of the Governor General's Council unless he was so appointed. It laid down that the members of the Board of Control and their staff were henceforth to be paid out of Indian revenues. Charter Act of 1813. The features of this act were as follows. It abolished the trade monopoly of the company in India, that is, that Indian trade was thrown open to all British merchants. However, it continued the monopoly of the company over trade in tea and trade with China. It asserted the sovereignty of a British crown over the company's territories in India. It allowed the Christian missionaries to come to India for the purpose of enlightening the people. It provided for the spread of Western education among the inhabitants of the British territories in India. It authorized the local governments in India to impose taxes on persons. They could also punish the persons for not paying taxes. Charter Act of 1833. This act was the final step towards centralization in British India. The features of this act were as follows. It made the Governor General of Bengal as the Governor General of India and vested in him all civil and military powers. Thus, the act created for the first time Government of India having authority over the entire territorial area possessed by the British in India. Lord William Bentinck was the first Governor General of India. It deprived the Governor of Bombay and Madras of their legislative powers. The Governor General of India was given exclusive legislative powers for the entire British India. The laws made under the previous act were called as regulations, while laws made under this act were called as acts. It ended the activities of the East India Company as a commercial body, which became a purely administrative body. It provided that the company territories in India were held by it in trust for His Majesty, his heirs and successors. The Charter Act of 1833 attempted to introduce a system of open competition for selection of civil servants and stated that the Indians should not be debarred from holding any place, office and employment under the company. However, this provision was negated after oppositions from the Court of Directors. Charter Act of 1853. This was the last of the series of charter acts passed by the British Parliament between 1793 and 1853. It was a significant constitutional landmark. The features of this act were as follows. It separated for the first time the legislative and executive functions of the Governor General's Council. It provided for addition of 6 new members called legislative councillors to the council. In other words, it established a separate Governor General Legislative Council, which came to be known as the Indian Central Legislative Council. This legislative wing of the council functioned as a mini parliament, adopting the same procedures as the British Parliament. This legislation for the first time was treated as a special function of the government, requiring special machinery and special process. It introduced an open competition system of selection and recruitment of civil servants. The covenanted service was thus thrown open to the Indian also. Accordingly, the Committee on the Indian Civil Service was appointed in 1854. It extended the company's rule and allowed it to retain the possession of Indian territories on a trust for the British Crown, but it did not specify any particular period unlike the previous charters. This was a clear indication that the company's rule could be terminated at any time the Parliament liked. It introduced for the first time local representation in the Indian Legislative Council. Of the 6 new legislative members of the Governors General Council, 4 members were appointed by the local governments of Madras, Bombay, Bengal and Agra.